Welcome to the Industrial Talk Podcast with Scott McKenzie. Scott is a passionate industry professional dedicated to transferring cutting-edge, industry-focused innovations and trends while highlighting the men and women who keep the world moving. So put on your hard hat, grab your work boots, and let's go.
All right, welcome to the Industrial Talk Podcast. Once again, we take a journey into why industry is so doggone cool. I'm telling you right now, you're bold, you're brave, you dare greatly, you solve problems, you innovate like nobody's business, you're changing lives and you're changing the world. That's why we, on this podcast, celebrate you, the industrial hero. That's who you are. Thank you very much for what you do, and that's why we love you here on this platform. In the hot seat, in the Industrial Talk hot seat, we got a gentleman by the name of John Hayes. He is the director of sales at a company called Balyo. And we're going to be talking about autonomous vehicles. Let's get going. Yeah, so there's some challenges that we are experiencing. And of course, you know that the Industrial Talk platform is all about innovation and being able to apply that innovation, be able to apply those solutions to industry to be able to be better, stronger, faster, the Steve Austin approach. And Balyo is no different. We're talking about autonomous vehicles. Now, before we get into that particular conversation, let's just have a recap of Industrial Talk 2.0. Again, if I keep on preaching the necessity for education, it's out there. If I keep on preaching the necessity to collaborate, the people are out on Industrial Talk, and they do want to collaborate. They do want to solve problems. And thirdly, if we're talking about innovation all the time and how that innovation is applied to each industry and how they're using that innovation to, well, make you better, provide greater customer service, everything in between, it makes sense. So Industry 2.0 is a focus on being able to make that process, the education, the collaboration, and the innovation process simpler, because we need to bring people together. We need to be able to have that conversation in a big way. And John Hayden and the wonderful team out of Balyo, they're just like right in the thick of it. And they've got solutions that are very, very important. Now, let's get on with the interview. So we're going to be talking a little bit about over the period of times, we're finding that labor is a very tight commodity, and yet companies need to keep going, and companies need to keep their doors open, and company needs to continue to deliver good customer service and survive in this particular unique market that we find ourselves in. And of course, the conversation has to revolve around autonomous vehicles. What do we do within the warehouse, and how do we create a safer environment? Of course. So John and Team Balyo have a great solution, but we definitely talk about a lot of the stuff that's associated with the market today. So with that said, here's John. John, welcome to the Industrial Talk Podcast. Absolute honor that you have joined and start to share your wisdom and insights with the listeners of Industrial Talk. How you doing?
I'm doing very well. Thanks for having me on today. Thank you very much.
Pretty cool. I mean, I'm going to enjoy this particular, conversation, because it's really wrapped around. And listeners, we're going to be talking a little bit about sort of that lack of labor that exists within today's market, and sort of this push for autonomous or automatic vehicles. And fortunately for us, John with Balyo sort of understands that particular topic. But before we get going, give us a little background on who you are.
Well, thank you very much. Yeah, I hope I have some knowledge and background. I started in 1993. In the AGV industry. Yeah, I'm old. That's right. I'm getting gray, as are you. So I don't want to hear anything out of you, pal.
Yeah, you have hair. I don't.
Fair enough. It started way back then, started building vehicles, and then went on site to install. And then from there was lucky enough to be kind of adopted by this industry. It was a very, very small industry in 93. And most of those folks that I worked with moved on to other companies, and as did I. And jumped back in very soon after I got back from a project in Japan, and sent a resume to a company that happened to have probably 4 or 5 people that I was in Japan with. There was another AGV company, and it just grew from there. Moved into sales, then from sales and applications engineering into more of a strategic role. vice president of sales and marketing. I think that marketing is a strong component of what we do as well. And then a director of sales here at Balyo. So unfortunately, I've been around, if you say. I've been around for quite some time through the AGV concept and now into the AMR world. And although there are some differences, the concepts are still the same. There is still moving product from point A to point B. There's a lot of technology that we talk about. This is different in how this works and those sorts of things. But in the end, I think customers or users really only care and can really only afford to care that things get from point A to point B efficiently, and they don't have to worry about it. Why put a system in that's going to be more problems than it's worth?
Yeah. For the listeners, define AGV and AMR.
Absolutely happy to do that. So AGV is kind of the catch-all term that's been around for ages, and it stands for automatic guided vehicle. And, that goes back to the 50s, really, a very early system. I believe Barrett was the first company that put one of those in, and it rode on wires. And the fundamental principle of AGV is that it path follows. So if you think about the earliest vehicle, it just ran, it had a sensor under the vehicle that looked for the wire in the floor. So the frequency, it had a frequency generator, and it looked for that frequency. But conceptually, they all do exactly that same thing today, even though most of them are virtual, using something called laser guidance, using laser triangulation. They still do virtually the same thing. Now, AMR is a new concept, which stands for automated or autonomous mobile robot. Really, it's a technology difference, and then it's highlighted by the way that it gets from point A to point B. Autonomous mobile robots path plan versus path follow. So that whole concept going back to the 50s with the wire in the floor, it's been turned on its ear. It still uses similar technology, sensor based, much more sensor rich, has a lot more sensors on the vehicle. But the vehicle itself maps its environment and then understands where it's at and doesn't follow a defined path. It creates its own path. Now, many companies constrain them, but really that's the difference. One path plans, AMR's path plan, and AGV's path follow. Now, there are shades of gray and companies are starting to overlap. AGV companies are being more AMR-like, but in principle, that's really what makes them different.
So why is this important? Why is this tech important with the industry?
Well, AGVs have historically been very custom. So most vendors would build a custom vehicle every single time for every single customer. And the integration was difficult, installation and integration, because it required that line in the floor, keeping in mind that it doesn't really exist that much anymore. But it meant a lot more time in the field. So they were expensive. At the root of it, they were expensive. It's the shifting to AMR began a few years back, probably 10 or more years ago, with respect to AGV vendors putting controls on OEM vehicles, OEM being vehicles being Hyster-Yale, which is one of the companies we use, Linda in Europe, those types of vehicles, platforms, and putting controls on them. And then the structure of going to a controls platform that didn't require infrastructure, so that wire in the floor or the targets or those sorts of things, that concept is called SLAM. It stands for simultaneous location and mapping. And almost all users of infrastructure use that concept. What highlights that is the fact that it's inexpensive, because we don't need anything to map. I mean, we use the vehicle to map the facility, and we don't need any infrastructure. Then the systems become smarter and smarter. So as time wore on, the systems become smarter and smarter. The tech gets better. But there's a trade-off, as with anything, right? That new tech is still, it has great promise, but it's not as stable. It's not as accurate, generally speaking. And it's not as fast as AGV technology. So it's almost like going to, if you take a car concept, you've got gas-powered cars, right? And you could have a drag race gas-powered car, like the John Force concept of drag car. Or you could have an electric car. Obviously, electric car is more technologically advanced, but right now there's no drag race electric car, maybe in the future, right? So to draw an analogy, that's kind of where we're at. You can have a Cadillac of a system that you can trust with an AGV concept. It will just do the job all day long. It's a little more expensive, maybe in some ways a little, it maybe has a little more maintenance because of the off-board equipment, but it works. And then there's the other side, and then there's the far side is the tech of the situation, the new tech, the AMR tech. AMR tech in and of itself, with respect to some of the application suitability, is great because it doesn't require high accuracy and it doesn't require high speed. And when I say that application, let me make it more clear. Picking applications where people are walking along or being what we call zone picking. They'll stay in an area and the vehicles will come to them and they will place something in the bins. That doesn't require an awful lot of speed. It doesn't require an awful lot of accuracy, a lot of integration work, but that's expected across the spectrum. But when you start to get into the middle ground and then moving over to speed and efficiency, that's where the tech has promise, but it's not totally there yet. So, it will get there, but it's just not there quite yet.
Okay, this is all great. What problems are we solving? What is the problem that's demanding this?
Well, taking tech out of it, and let's just look at it as an industry. Historically, going back many years, the problem we were solving was one of ROI. It was one where you erred on the side of the company every single time, which was I would theoretically talk to someone about, well, we could take a person off of a forklift and that would save you X number of dollars a year. And in order to do this project, you will need to remove this many people and you will get what you call a hurdle rate. Typical hurdle rates in the US are 18 months to 2 years. So it's always been at that point about ROI, and it's completely changed. So what are we solving today? Drive down the highway and you'll see manufacturing plants and distribution plants with banners hanging outside now hiring. And what we're solving is an inability for businesses to find people to move product. And it's a real problem. And it's one that exists and has moved the needle for this type of equipment. It's wildly popular now. It used to be voodoo. People would look at it moving around autonomously and would back away like, what am I seeing here? It is becoming more and more adopted. But the ability just to get labor has eclipsed nearly any other reason to purchase this equipment. Safety is still a reasoning, certainly. But it's the ability just to find someone. And then when you do, so we did a project a couple of years back for a large shipper. And everybody knows who the big two are. It was one of those. And they said that, we're looking at this project because our turnover is over 100%.
Hold it. Turnover of people?
Turnover of people. Turnover of people.
100%.
So what they said they were seeing is one of the larger companies put a warehouse distribution center in down the road, and people were getting paid a little bit more per hour and went down the street. And you can't blame a forklift operator who's making X number of dollars an hour if he's going to get a nickel, dime, $quarter an hour more. He's going to go down the street. That's what's going to happen. But one of the things that I found funny is they would say, well, eventually they come back because we pay a little bit more and they'll come back here. But then you have resources bouncing back and forth and those things. And when you think about trying to run a business, when your primary concern is moving product from either a manufacturing line or through a distribution center, your primary resource is the movement. It's that person or that equipment. So it's gotten to the point where when you have that risk, you have to find a way to mitigate it. And that's really what it's coming down to. So I think that's the problem that we're solving today.
It's interesting. Yeah, it's interesting because I would imagine a lot of these distribution centers are not located where there's a big pool of skilled individuals. So that's also a problem, correct?
Yes. Now, it's funny. If you think about a forklift driver, we don't need a Harvard graduate to drive a forklift. And God knows I'm not a Harvard graduate. But the savvy ones are the ones that do look at the guy that just moved in across the street and take the dollar an hour and go to work over there. And the ones that stay, frankly, any forklift driver, when you look at the safety aspect, the number of injuries for forklift drivers is quite high. Wow. Simply because driving a forklift is not the most gentle thing on your body. You know, you're driving in some cases a 10,000-pound vehicle around that's bouncing off of, you know, expansion joints and holes in the floor, or maybe running into things. So you have a lot of injury, you have a lot of those things, which obviously drives your costs up for, you know, insurance as well as workers' comp and those things. So, you know, it's, even though they may not be, you know, the Harvard grads of the world, they're getting hurt. And if you can find a way to not get them hurt, then that's obviously a beneficial thing. And I think that my message has always been, you know, we don't want to put people out of work. What we want is a mutually beneficial position for these folks. I think, at least I think I would. I don't know that I would want a mindless job where I was driving back and forth. Some of these distribution centers are 200 or 2 million square feet.
Yeah.
And they're driving, you know, a half a mile. And by the end of their day, they're thinking about anything but what's going on in the plant. So I think that having the ability to move folks into a position where they can do stuff with their mind versus just driving a vehicle over and over and over again, the same path. Can you imagine, you know, 8 hours a day, you drive the same path over and over and over again? I mean, people run into things because they just get tired. Mentally, they get tired, and they're probably worn out at the end of the day, mentally, more than they are physically.
And I would imagine the same thing exists. There's a greater demand.
Concept.
There's an increased demand too. I see it out there that there's just more movement of products, and this logistics backbone is becoming more and more important, and creating more and more demand on that professional that is just driving that forklift around. And I like the point that you talk about safety. You're absolutely spot on. I think that there's business continuity, huge, and so
for sure.
You're hitting on some great points. With that said, what's the biggest pushback here? I mean, it makes sense.
Well, it's still a bit of black magic, and it is still a bit expensive. The pushback has been reduced greatly, mostly because of what's been termed the Amazon effect. And I am part of it, and I bet you're a part of it as well. Hell, you know, we had a conversation the other day, and you said, "Hey, go get these headphones because they're going to work very well." Well, guess where I got them from? I got them from Amazon. Well, you know, there's an Amazon distribution center. I'm outside of Whitfield, Virginia. It's not more than 50 miles from here. And with the truck stuff that we talked about a few minutes ago, the over-the-road trucking that they can only do 8 hours a day, well, they pop distribution centers up around larger cities. Yeah. So you're right. More and more and more desire and need for automation. More distribution that means more people, harder to get. So by proxy, the automated equipment becomes more and more in demand and favorable. I think that it's not black magic any longer. The costs have come down, but even so, if you look at the paradigm U.S. versus Europe, the hurdle rate or the internal rate of return for Europe in many cases is 5 years or more. In the U.S., early on in conversations about this equipment, we're looking at 18 months to 2 years, which means that really we're looking at 2 or 3 shift operations and sometimes 4. It's a no-brainer for a 3 or 4 shift operation. It just makes, because we're providing the vehicles that operate on all 4 shifts with no people. If you thought about that very same operation, you have 4 times the number of people. So the numbers start to make a lot of sense. I think that personally, I think this will start to make a lot of more beneficial use. We talked about this internally at Balyo the other day. You know, how do we kind of work towards being a more world responsible company, I guess is the best way to say it. My view is when we can take this equipment and mom and pop companies can afford to take a piece of automated equipment and grow their business, then they can compete with, and I don't want to say the Amazons of the world, but I think you kind of see where I'm going with it. They can grow their business without having to add the expense of multi-shift operations. They can grow, and moving people again into this more mutually beneficial roles, running a machine or working on things or those things that use your mind. When we can take this concept and it becomes less the purview of Fortune 100 companies and becomes more available to mom and pop, I think that everybody's going to be a lot happier with what we can do in this world. But it's still expensive. The equipment is still expensive. The sensor base is something else.
But you're getting there. I mean, those costs.
Sure. Yeah,
continue.
Yeah, the tech, when we talked about AMR originally, you talked about the gulf of differences. The cost for AMRs are less expensive than AGVs in almost all cases, and the costs are coming down. Now, one of the things that we're seeing is the AGVs used to be kind of built jack of all trades, and that was the expectation. I could buy an AGV and it would do just anything, where it could pick from the floor or put something in a rack 30 feet tall. But if you reset your expectations of what automation can do and you start small, this stuff can be inexpensive. So you could, you pick something very simple to automate. You don't have to start. And frankly, I recommend that you don't start with a 30, 40 vehicle system that's super complex. The rapid pace of change within your organization would be head snapping. Your entire organization would be turned upside down quickly. The thing that the new tech is allowing us to do is do things like proof of concepts and those things where we can come in and put a single vehicle system in and show you and your organization how it works, what the process changes might need to be, and how to get used to them before rolling out more and more vehicles. So most all of our AGV AMR brethren report to the MHI. It used to be called MHIA. I think it's called MHI now, Material Handling Industry of America. And so the numbers used to be represented. We would all report our numbers. And on average, the average AGV system was about 5 to 7 vehicles. And the reason for that is the 3 line items outside of the hardware, which was engineering, installation, and integration. That was the time on site, really. And you had to amortize that over the vehicle cost, and 5 to 7 just happened to be the sweet spot where it started to make return on investment sense, right? The new tech allows us to put vehicles in for a much lower number, so people can now afford to put a single vehicle system in and learn from it. So the tech is pushing all of us forward. It really is.
I like it. And what stands out would be that incremental approach. You can proof of concept it. I think that's great. It doesn't have to be big bang. You don't have to dig a trench of some sort. It doesn't have to be that complex. Now, we're going to have to wrap this conversation up. John, how does somebody get a hold of you?
I think the best case scenario would be to reach out via the internet. It's balyo.com. So www.balyo.com, and you'll be able to reach out to us as a company there. My personal email address is certainly available, and that's john.hayes, Hayes, @balyo.com, and I'd be more than happy to help. I tend to take a more consultative approach to everything that I do, so very little is salesy with me, so I'm more than happy to just chat with people if it's something they'd like to talk about.
And if you type in John Hayes, and this just blows me away on LinkedIn, you've got John Hayes.
No, I was pretty early, wasn't I?
You are, man. I'm looking at him going, and it's not John Hayes, 7953, blah, 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 blah. No, that's impressive.
I've been around for a while. My rinse grave's not for nothing. I can promise you that.
Right. All right. A couple of things that I want to put before you listeners. Once again, I love the concept, and we've got the problem of labor. We've got to be able to look at it from that from the technology perspective. I think Balyo's got an interesting value proposition. I like the fact that we're talking a little bit about the incremental approach. I think the future is bright when it comes to this. And I think if you're driving down the costs and trying to have that mom and pop mindset, I think you've got a great value proposition. I like it.
Thank you very much.
All
Thank
right,
you very
listeners,
much.
we're going to wrap it up.
I really appreciate you, Doug.
Yeah, we're going to wrap it up on the other side. Do not go away. We will be right back.
You're listening to the Industrial Talk Podcast Network.
All right, that is John Hayes. That's Hayes. And you definitely can go out to John Hayes. His LinkedIn stat card is all out there. And you know what? It is truly John Hayes, Hayes. Balyo is the company. Go to balyo.com. Find out more about how that solution and what they're doing at Balyo can definitely help you and your manufacturing process as well as your warehousing stuff. It's everything. That's John right there, man. I'm looking at it, his stat card right there. John, good-looking guy with the beard. Can't miss. All right, once again, we are talking about Industrial Talk 2.0. This is where you're going to go. You're going to go to educate, you're going to go to collaborate, and you're going to go to innovate. We are all bound together, without a doubt. We have ties. Every industry, whatever it is, look at Balyo, man. That's important stuff, and they have ties to the warehousing and the manufacturing world. Important stuff. Reach out to him. All right. Thank you very much. Be bold, be brave, dare greatly. You're changing the world. Thank you very much for joining the Industrial Talk Podcast. We will be right back.